Hey there, viewers. The verdict was only moments away, but what happened to Diddy right before that stunned everyone watching. Whether it was punishment, preparation, or something else entirely, what they did behind closed doors left people shaken. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The Soundproof Wing. I didn't even want the job at MDC Brooklyn, that's the truth of it. I was rotated in straight from a detail down in Quantico. Temporary placement. Supposed to be cushy. Something about high security but low contact, they said. Keep your head down, do your rounds, don't ask questions. First mistake I made was believing them. Second mistake was asking about the door with no number. The Special Housing Unit, the SHU, doesn't run like the rest of the facility. The lights flicker on a slightly different rhythm. The ventilation hums a little off-key. You feel it more than you see it. And the silence, it's a kind that settles into your ears and never leaves. You think you're alone until something shifts behind the wall. On my second day, Lieutenant Caro handed me a clipboard and a radio and walked me to the outer gate of Tier 4B. "Read everything, follow nothing," he said flat. "You'll be stationed here during high-profile protocols. Do not engage. Do not question the escorts. Do not look at 37,452.54. I remember nodding. I hadn't even seen the guy yet. They didn't say Diddy, never used his name. Just the number, like it stripped the power out of the air. I knew who it was, of course. Everyone did. The news never shut up about him. The trials, the tapes, the raids. But what no one tells you is how different a man looks when the gold chains are gone and the walls close in. My first glimpse of him was through the one-way glass in the restraint corridor. They had him sedated that day, wheeled in on a gurney, eyes fluttering under the surface like he was dreaming of something burning. 2 guards flanked him, and a third wheeled the cart. Nobody said a word. Not to me, not to each other. Even their footfalls seemed dampened, like the floor swallowed the sound on purpose. They turned down a side hall I'd never seen on the blueprints. No sign, no designation. I checked my copy of the facility map that night in the security booth. The hallway didn't exist. The following day, I asked Officer Mejia, a grizzled CO with 30 years behind him, if that was normal. The sedation, the silent corridors, the phantom halls. He didn't answer, just stared at me for a long time before saying, "You don't get it yet, kid. That man ain't here to be held. He's here to be handled." The phrase stuck with me. Handled, like a package, like something volatile you can't let break open. That night was the first time I heard the phrase from the inmates, whispered between cells, muffled through the vents. "Soundproof night," one muttered. "You hear it too?" said another. "No, man, that's the point. You don't hear it." I sat by the monitoring console long after my shift technically ended, watching the live feed screens, most of them blacked out or pixelated beyond use. There were always 2 feeds I could never toggle, Cam NX1 and Cam SV3. They flickered like VHS static, no label, no timestamp. One of them, I swear, showed the same hallway where I'd seen 37,452.54 taken. But now it looked older, with peeling paint and a single bare bulb swinging as if in a breeze that shouldn't exist underground. A few nights later, I was placed on corridor watch. Graveyard shift. Midnight to 8 a.m. The floor was colder that night. Even with the heating system operational, the air had this bite, like static after a thunderstorm. I kept glancing toward the hallway with no name, and then, around 2:16 a.m., they came. 4 guards, no chatter. They moved in perfect synchrony, like they'd done it 100 times. 2 carried the restraints. 1 carried a black cloth hood. The last carried something that looked like an old-school tape recorder, but I never saw anyone press play. They unlocked Diddy's cell without a word. I could barely see in, but the light inside was dim, intentionally, I think. When they brought him out, he didn't resist, didn't speak. His eyes were wide open, unfocused. He was murmuring something under his breath, over and over, like prayer. It wasn't until they passed close that I caught the words, 10 gold bottles, 9 gold sins. 8 in the mirror, 7 within. I'll never forget the way he said it. Rhythm like a nursery rhyme. Voice like cracked vinyl. They didn't blindfold him this time. They didn't have to. His eyes weren't looking anywhere real. They took him down the unmarked hallway again, and that was that. When I checked the logs the next morning, there was no record of movement, no log entries, no camera switches. The timestamp jumped from 2:15 a.m. to 3:05 a.m., like time had folded in on itself. I asked Officer Mejia again, quieter this time. He sighed, wiped a hand down his face. Used to be we'd isolate the worst in here. Terror threats, cartel freaks, rogue feds. But that man, he brought his own ghost in with him. Now they're trying to squeeze it out before court hears what's left. I didn't understand it then. I still don't. Not really. The next night, I took a risk. Stayed an hour after my shift, hid in the back corridor near laundry access where I knew the cameras didn't quite reach. I waited. Around the same time, 2:15, I heard it. Not footsteps. Something after footsteps. A dragging noise. Then faint static. Then silence. Heavy silence. My ears began to ring, not from volume, from absence. The lights in my hallway flickered. I felt, and I mean felt, something brush past me. Nothing there when I turned, but the air pulled my sleeve, like pressure dropping in a pressurized cabin. The next morning, I saw Diddy again. He was returned sometime after I'd left. When I passed his cell at noon during med-check rotation, I saw him sitting upright on the floor, back against the wall, eyes wide but unblinking, mouth moving but no sound. The phrase on his lips again, the same broken verse. They moved him to an evaluation cell after that. I wasn't assigned to his corridor for 2 days. When I returned, he looked worse, thinner, paler. Someone had shaved his beard. His hair was graying at the temples. His hands shook when he held his water cup. When I asked one of the shift commanders about it, just casually, as if it didn't really matter, the guy didn't even look up from his tablet, just said, "They're softening him. No good having a lion at sentencing. You want a lamb." That night, I didn't sleep. You tell yourself these places run on rules, that inmates are guarded, fed, processed, sentenced, clean, neat, controlled. But that's a lie. Some people aren't brought here to wait for judgment. Some people are brought here to be undone before judgment ever gets close. And now, every time I hear a verse on the radio, I wait to hear his voice. Not in the music. In the silence between the beats. Chapter 2. The transfer that never was. My job doesn't involve blood, shackles, or courtrooms. I work behind a desk, in a room with no windows and just enough stale air to remind you how long you've been sitting. I'm not law enforcement. I'm not intelligence. I'm logistics, data, custody chain audits, intake forms, transfer verification. All the paper and screen backbones that keep the federal system pretending it's coherent. 3 days before opening arguments in the Combs case, I was halfway through my routine audit of inmate movements at MDC Brooklyn. I was double-checking routing confirmations, something boring I'd done 100 times. when I came across a transfer slip flagged in orange. That alone was rare. We don't use orange unless there's a national security tie-in or a jurisdictional override. The name on the record was blank, just an ID, 37,44254. Even if you weren't following the case, that number had been whispered through the building for months. It was him. The man the tabloids called a mogul, the feds called a trafficker, and the rest of us quietly referred to as a myth. Diddy. The record showed he'd been transferred for emergency psychiatric evaluation, time-stamped 3:11 a.m. even 3 nights ago. Origin, SHU-4B, destination, facility Red Decks. No state listed. Escorting personnel, redacted. It didn't make sense. All official psychiatric evaluations from MDC are routed through the local VA length psych wing. Nothing in our system, nothing above or below my clearance uses Red X as a destination code. And yet, here it was, filed in the live system, marked completed, initialed by someone with the alias L. Black. That wasn't a real name. I knew the formatting. That was a clearance tag. I tried to pull up the accompanying movement logs, the surveillance backup timestamps, and the overnight shift roster. All of them were corrupt. Not deleted, just sliced. There were hours of footage with frames intact, but everything from 2:58 to 8:47 that day was blank or looped. The cameras showed empty hallways or repeated the same segment of a CO walking past the East Corridor, a digital stutter. I turned to the manual logbook we keep as backup, thinking maybe someone wrote something they weren't supposed to input digitally. Nothing. No mention of 37,452.54 being moved, but the audit trail, those red-tagged movement files, said it happened. My gut twisted. I've seen bureaucratic mistakes, typos, mismatched IDs, but this wasn't that. This was constructed. I went deeper. I ran a cross-reference on Diddy's ID tag to see if any other anomalous activity had been tied to his file. That's when I found the designation. Lazarus Black, Tier 7 Override. I froze. We don't use Tier 7. That's black site level clearance. Tier 5 is reserved for high-profile terrorism suspects. Tier 6 is practically myth. Tier 7, I'd only seen it once, on a sealed archive from a Guantanamo repatriation file years ago. The Lazarus label was even stranger. It wasn't a standard protocol name. It didn't align with any known mental health codes, transfer groups, or criminal classifications. It felt symbolic, almost ritualistic. I didn't go to my supervisor. I knew better. Instead, I called a contact, an old colleague who used to run security at Florence ADX before retiring early. I told him I'd found something strange, asked if he'd ever heard of Lazarus Black, used in movement protocols. He went quiet on the line, then said flatly, "You shouldn't be looking at that. That label's not for transfers, it's for resets." I asked him what he meant. It's old, from post-9/11 psychological warfare trials. The term was used when they wanted to destabilize subjects before testimony. Not torture, not interrogation, just make them forget who they were long enough to control the narrative. I felt cold. The kind of cold that creeps down your spine and into your teeth. "Why would they use that here?" I asked him. "You already know why," he said, and hung up. I stared at my screen for a long time after that. The blinking cursor seemed louder than the humming lights above me. I shouldn't have done what I did next, but I filed a formal internal complaint. Quietly, carefully. I didn't name names. I simply flagged the movement record as inconsistent with protocol and marked it for review. The system accepted it, timestamped it, gave me a reference number. An hour later, my access was revoked. just like that. I couldn't even log into the audit terminal. I couldn't view my own files. The system told me I was now under Category 8 flag pending clearance review. I'd never seen that code in my career. I wasn't even sure it existed. I packed my things early, trying not to look paranoid as I left the records wing. I told the front desk I had a migraine. They nodded like they already knew. When I got to my locker, I found something wedged under the flap of my coat. A small note. No envelope, just folded printer paper, like it had been torn from a report. One sentence, typed in 12-point courier font. He needs to be broken before he's judged. No signature. No fingerprints. I didn't sleep that night. I replayed every frame I had seen. Every looped hallway, every error log, every silence between the footage gaps. The idea that he'd been removed, not to be helped or evaluated, but to be hollowed out, to be emptied before he stepped foot into court. The next morning I tried to log in again, still locked. A message flashed across the screen. Clearance under administrative review. Do not proceed. I wasn't even supposed to have seen the files. Later that day, I saw a news segment playing on the cafeteria TV. Footage of Diddy entering court for a pre-hearing check. He looked thinner, frailer, paler than even his mugshots suggested. But what struck me wasn't his appearance. It was his eyes. Vacant, detached. Like someone walking through a dream they didn't believe in anymore. I remembered what my contact said, that Lazarus Black was a way to destabilize a person, to erase the parts that made them dangerous, not with pain, but with disorientation. And I wondered, who decided he needed to be erased? And why? The court might see a man, the public might see a case. But behind the walls of MDC Brooklyn, I think they already decided the verdict wouldn't be the punishment. A preparation would be. Chapter 3, The Witness They Buried. I've been in this line of work long enough to know what it means when the phone stops ringing. It's not silence, it's an answer. 2 weeks ago, I sat in a low-rent motel room just outside Albany, cheap floral bedspread and flickering lamp overhead, interviewing a man who didn't want to be on record. His name was Aaron, but I wasn't allowed to use that. He said he used to handle logistics for private events connected to C-level entertainment. That's what he called it. CE for controlled experiences. Freak-offs, more bluntly. The kinds of parties people whispered about, but never admitted attending. He told me he'd loaded vans with women, managed wristbands that weren't scanned but weighed, removed phones from guests, distributed blacked-out envelopes with room numbers. He said the whole thing was engineered. Every night. Who sat where, who watched from behind the curtains, who wore red, who wore white. He was terrified, but ready. I could tell. I wasn't new to this. I'd covered trafficking cases before. I'd exposed a local police department running a protection racket for brothels masquerading as massage clinics. I'd interviewed survivors from circuit loops, running girls up and down the Eastern Corridor. But Aaron was different. He wasn't a victim. He wasn't a cop. He was in the middle. The handler, the one who stood between the cameras and the screams. And he wanted to talk. He didn't say Diddy's name outright, but he called him the King. Said the King never got his hands dirty, but his shadow walked every hallway. That phrase stayed with me. His shadow walked every hallway. It sounded like poetry, but I knew he meant something else. Something literal. He told me he was going into protection. Testimony scheduled. U.S. Marshals had picked out the location. He'd get a new ID afterward. He'd been through the interviews, the trauma scans, even the polygraphs. He was ready. And then he was gone. Disappeared. No press briefing. No leaked court schedule. No witness list mentioning him by code or pseudonym. When I reached out to his handler, a contact I'd fostered for months, I got silence. Not even a bounce back, just dead signal. I called around. Official lines, friendlies. One agent in Virginia who owed me a favor finally replied through Signal. The witness declined, withdrew from testimony, said it was too dangerous. That's all I know. I didn't believe it for a second. Aaron had been scared, but not flaky. He had something real, something he needed off his chest. His voice had trembled when he talked about the rooms with no cameras, the girls who signed NDAs in tears, the back rooms where the viewers sat and watched live feeds. He wasn't the type to run last minute, so I drove. Not officially. Not in my work car. I borrowed a friend's clunker and drove north to the last location he'd mentioned, an off-book motel near a witness drop site in Utica. Marshals used it for transitions between IDs. It had a side entrance with no camera, a lockbox for burner phones, a back hallway connecting to the management quarters. The motel was half empty when I arrived. The front desk kid didn't even glance up when I checked in under a fake name, Room 17. I waited until dusk, then circled around the back and started looking for angles where cameras pointed, where they didn't. Found the blind spot behind the vending machine shed. That's when I noticed something strange. The camera mounted above the rear door wasn't connected. The cable had been snipped, clean, not torn or weathered, fresh. No power, no footage. Natter. I found the manager, mid-60s, smoked so much the air clung to his shirt like tar, and asked about the camera. He laughed, said it had gone down a week ago. Some federal boys came by, said it was under review, told me not to touch it. I asked if he'd seen anyone come through. He shrugged. Black van, government tags, 2 men, tall, suits, not marshals. How do you know? I asked. He leaned in. Real marshals don't hold their guns like that. These boys had the weight wrong. That night, I wrote the story, or at least tried to. I couldn't get the words right. Something about it didn't sit cleanly. The timelines were too neat, the excuses too quiet. I submitted a formal inquiry to the FBI's press office the next day, asking for confirmation on Aaron's withdrawal from testimony. No response. I followed up. Still nothing. 2 days later, a plain cardboard envelope showed up at my apartment door. No postage, no name, no label. Inside was a small flash drive, unmarked, encrypted. I didn't plug it into my laptop. That's a rookie move. I used a burner rig I keep offline. No Wi-Fi, no external connections, sandboxed and disposable. The drive held one video. No metadata, no timestamp. Just an MP4 labeled drop3_recovered. I clicked it open. The footage was shaky. Phone video, nighttime, blurred street lamps and hurried footsteps. Breathing, heavy, panicked. Someone, Aaron, I think, was filming as he ran. I told you no, I told you I'm protected. There was shouting, the sound of tires over gravel. A black van pulled into frame, unmarked, matte finish, too clean for private use. The side door flung open. 2 men in black suits, no badges. One reached out. Aaron screamed. You can't take me, they promised. Don't let him walk. Don't let him walk. He has the room. The phone fell. The camera tilted up into sky. A brief glimpse of stars, street light, then darkness. A thud, scuffling, silence. The file ended. I sat there for 10 minutes, staring at the frozen frame. Then I watched it again, and again. That line, he has the room. It haunted me. Not a room, the room. Was it metaphor, something literal, a recording, a location, a memory? I filed a copy of the video anonymously to 3 contacts I trusted, but I didn't publish it. Not yet. Something about it felt too unfinished, Too dangerous. The kind of thing that disappears. You. Since that night, I've been watching my street from the window. My phone rings twice, then cuts off. My laptop crashes more than it should. 2 of my interviews canceled without explanation. They buried him. Not with shovels, not with graves, with silence. With redacted memos and scrambled footage and black vans that drive faster than questions can keep up. The court might not miss him. The jurors will never know his name. But I do, and I still hear his voice. Don't let him walk. Chapter 4. Courtroom Froze. I've been transcribing for the courts for almost 11 years. Federal cases, state hearings, everything from insurance fraud to interstate conspiracy. I've heard testimony that made me bite my lip to keep typing. I've sat in hearings where the only sound was the scratch of a pen or the clack of my own fingers on the machine. You get used to ugly things in this job. You learn to separate your hands from your ears. Let the words pass through you like static. But today, the static had teeth. It was Courtroom 4E, old wood paneling with polished marble veins climbing up the walls like petrified roots. The air always runs cold in that room. The vents placed low so it hits you at the ankles first and works its way up your spine by the time the judge sits down. The ceiling lights are recessed but harsh. They create shadows behind the witness stand, like something's hiding just behind the curve of your eye. He sat across from me. Sean Combs. Diddy. I'd heard his name 1,000 times before today. Never said it out loud in court. That's another rule I've learned. Named Andrews lose their weight when they're typed. But his? It still felt heavy in the air. He wore a slate gray suit, buttoned all the way to the collar, hands clasped in front of him like he was praying or pretending to. He didn't move much, not when the prosecution stood, not when the judge leaned forward, not when the first objection was raised. The court had been sealed. No public gallery, no press, just legal teams, the judge, a federal observer, 2 marshals, and me, the stenographer, the one who's supposed to watch but never react. The hearing was about admissibility. Whether a specific piece of surveillance footage, the one leaked last week, could be introduced officially as part of the government's argument. There were layers of red tape around it. Arguments about chain of custody, privacy, ethical impact on jury bias. Diddy's lawyer objected 3 separate times before the judge finally, quietly said, 90 seconds, nothing more. The bailiff dimmed the lights. The screen was wheeled in. It wasn't a projector. The judge didn't want anything broadcast or recorded, just a simple flat monitor, barely larger than a kitchen TV, placed at a careful angle where no one in the gallery could see it from the hallway through the locked door. The footage loaded slowly. A grainy timestamp blinked in the corner. April 23rd, 25:39, 9:42 and 13 seconds. No one spoke. I stopped typing before the video even began. That's how I knew something wasn't normal. I always type, even when I'm not supposed to. The image showed the holding room, same as we'd seen in the internal briefings, but worse. The camera was angled low, closer than expected, almost intimate. There was no audio at first, just Diddy standing inside his cell, facing forward. Then, he took a step toward the glass. Across from him, the witness sat. His name isn't for me to say, but his shoulders were already trembling. You could see him trying to disappear inside his own clothes. Diddy raised one finger, not wagging it, just lifting, like a conductor calling for a downbeat. Then the audio crackled in, low at first, like a whisper brushing against a microphone caught in wind. If you talk, your mom will be the one to pay for it. Think carefully. I don't bluff. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic. It was colder than that. Detached. like a man telling someone the weather forecast. I didn't type, no one did anything. The witness on the screen began to cry, not a loud sob, not a breakdown, just the kind of weeping that happens when someone has been broken before and knows exactly how pain enters the body. In the courtroom, I could hear a marshal shift their feet. That was the only sound. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to go quiet. I looked across the room. Diddy hadn't moved. He sat in his chair, hands still folded, his eyes half-lidded, as if watching the video was a formality, a rerun, something he'd already lived through and moved past. The judge leaned back in his chair, slowly, as if age had finally found him. One of the prosecutors had stopped writing mid-sentence. Their pen sat awkward in their hand like they couldn't remember how to hold it. The defense team requested an immediate sidebar. It was urgent, whispered behind open folders and strained expressions. The judge denied it, at first, then stood. "This hearing is recessed until further notice." That's all he said. The bailiff turned off the screen. The lights came back on. The courtroom returned to its original brightness. But it didn't feel like anything was illuminated. It felt darker. No one moved right away. Not the prosecution, not the defense, not even the witness prep team seated near the door. And me? I stared at my machine. My fingers hovered over the keys. But they didn't move. I knew that line. I knew those words. Not because I'd heard them before, but because I'd felt them. The way people use power like a knife they don't have to show. The way some men don't need to yell to take the air out of a room. That's what we all felt. It wasn't the threat that broke the courtroom. It was the silence that followed. The unbroken stillness of a man who knew that everyone in the room had just seen him commit a crime, and who still sat calmly, like nothing had happened. Like nothing would happen. That kind of certainty, that kind of stillness, it does something to you. The legal teams began to shuffle, notes passed, phone screens lit up, exit doors opened slowly, as if everyone was waiting for someone else to be the first to leave. Remained seated. I typed only one line before the system timestamp rolled over to the next minute. Then I stopped. That night, I walked home in the dark, didn't take the subway, didn't answer my phone, didn't turn on the TV. Spent time looking at the sky. I sat on my fire escape with a glass of water that I never drank, and thought about what power looks like when it stops pretending to be polite. And I wondered if justice, after seeing that footage, would still bother pretending it was blind. Chapter 5. The Bleached Room. They never tell us what we're really cleaning. They just hand you a clipboard, point to a hallway, and tell you to keep your gloves on the whole time. I've been working maintenance for 22 years. Mostly courtrooms, lower wings, sometimes the basement archives when the interns don't want to get dusty. I've swept blood stains out of stairwells before the press showed up. I've power washed things off walls that didn't feel like they belonged to people, but this was different. It started with a phone call, not even through the building switchboard. Some guy said he was coordination intake, told me I was being reassigned for a special prep before trial proceedings the next morning. No name, no department, just an address and a door. Sub-level 3 of the federal courthouse isn't on the public tour route. Hell, it's barely on the blueprint schematics, and I've seen every one of them. They say the place used to be a Cold War-era records chamber, sealed off sometime in the 80s after a mold incident. But when I got down there, past the mechanical lifts through the dehumidifier-choked tunnels, Room C. That's what it said on the clipboard. Just Room C, no function, no department, nothing else. The hallway leading to it was different. The walls, instead of off-white or gray like the rest of the basement, were this faint pink, like they'd once been deep red, but bleached out by time or something more corrosive. The door to Room C didn't have a handle. It was flush with the frame, steel-lined, magnet-locked. I had to call it in just to get buzzed inside. When the door clicked open, I swear I felt pressure release, like opening an airplane cabin. Not a sound, not a hiss, just a weight leaving the air, replaced by something colder. The room inside had no windows, 4 walls, all bleached nearly white, but not evenly. You could see where something had once stained them red. Long streaks, as if someone had tried to scrub away stories that the paint still remembered. In the center, a chair. Not a courtroom chair, not a desk chair. This was padded, thick-strapped, metal-braced. It didn't belong in any federal building. It looked like something from a facility no one talked about. Next to it was a table with a recording station. Analog tape reels. A light above it blinked in slow, deliberate rhythm. No cord, no wall switch, just blinking. I stood there longer than I should have, staring. I was supposed to be vacuuming, dusting corners, but everything was too clean, artificially so. There were no cobwebs, no loose particles, just sterile air that burned my nostrils. On the floor, near the base of the chair, was a note, crumpled, half hidden under one of the restraint straps. I didn't want to pick it up, but I did. Re-verdict, silence test successful, subject compliant after 3 sessions. There was a number in the corner. 37,452.54. I knew that number. Everyone did. The trial upstairs was already heating up. Rumors about freak-offs, encrypted footage, sealed witness lists. The kind of case that makes federal buildings grow quiet and makes guards walk tighter. I looked at the note for a long time. Silence test. That's not legal. That's not even procedural. That's something else. Behavioral? Experimental? I put the note back. But then I did something I wasn't supposed to. I looked behind the recording station. There were wires. Thick, black, cloth-wrapped wires running not into a power socket, but through a drilled hole in the floor, downward into what looked like more concrete, buried deep. The chair had scratches on its arms, dozens of them, not random, parallel grooves, dig marks, like someone's fingers had tried to hold on while the rest of them gave up. I took out my flashlight and shone it up into the light fixture, the one blinking for no reason. There was no bulb. Him to blinked anyway. That's when I heard the footsteps. Not echoing, not stopping, just steady. I turned, clipboard still in my hand. A marshal stood at the doorway. Black suit, regulation tie, badge tucked just inside the lapel like they didn't want it too visible. He didn't look surprised to see me. "You're not supposed to be here," he said flatly. I fumbled. I had orders, clean up before trial prep, just following protocol. He nodded. "You've seen too much." I froze. But then he did something I didn't expect. He stepped aside. "You can go." I stood there, waiting, wondering if this was some test, a trap. Then he said without emotion, "Forget the room, he won't remember either." He walked away. That was it. I packed up. Didn't vacuum, didn't dust, just left the bleach-smelling silence behind. I tried not to think about it for the rest of the day. I told myself it was some retired chamber, used for extreme psychological evaluations, maybe an old witness protection room. But the deeper part of me, the part that's watched this system twist under weight before, knew better. They weren't trying to prep a room. They were trying to erase something inside a man. That night, I looked up the number again. 37,452.54. Same headlines, same trial, but now reporters were calling him unfit, diminished, detaching. They hadn't seen what I had. They hadn't seen the chair, the straps, the light that blinked with no power. The room that used to be red. And maybe that was the point. Chapter 6. His lawyer walked out again. The worst part about working in federal court isn't the trials. It's the quiet before them. You sit in those chambers, fingers poised above the stenograph machine, heart hammering, while men and women in suits decide the shape of truth behind closed doors. I'm not supposed to think about what I hear. I'm supposed to record, type, transcribe, seal, forget. But there are some days you can't. That day, 3 days before opening arguments, I was called into Chamber B, where sealed sessions were held for high prefaces cases. No press, no transcripts to the public, just private voices and the quiet click of my machine. They didn't call him by name when he walked in, just the defendant. But I knew. Everyone knew. He shuffled in, slower than I expected, not cuffed but with 2 marshals flanking him. He looked like a shadow of the pictures I'd seen. Gaunt, hair thinning, patchy gray at the edges. He didn't look at anyone directly, just sort of stared into the space between people. The judge nodded for me to begin. Sealed conference between the court, the defense, and the defendant. Subject, potential plea negotiation. Confidential and off-record until verified. The defense was fragmented. No introductions. 3 lawyers, one of them visibly exhausted. Another chewing her pen cap like it was keeping her grounded. None of them spoke first. It was the judge who finally did. Leaned forward, voice steady, practiced. There's a plea offer on the table. 20 years. Reduced charges. Voluntary testimony under protection. No trial. I kept typing, each word feeling heavier than the last. Diddy didn't answer right away. He looked down at the table. His hands were shaking. Then suddenly, he snapped. "I'm not pleading to something that doesn't exist," he said, voice rising like he'd rehearsed this 100 times in the dark. "You're not trying to prosecute me. You're trying to erase me." One of the lawyers whispered, "Sean, please." He slammed a fist down, not hard, but hard enough to stop everything. I took the footage. The real footage. The one that showed the studio, the basement. They swapped it out. "You think I don't know?" The judge stayed quiet. Diddy kept going. "You think I don't know what this is really about? It's not the tapes. It's not the parties. It's my son. He's gone. You hear me? He's gone. You tell me he declined to testify? That's a lie. He wanted to testify. He's missing and none of you will say it." No one moved. Then, without warning, one of his lawyers stood. "I won't be complicit in what you're doing to him," she said, voice even, no yelling, just broken. I thought this was defense. This is something else. She left the room. The others didn't follow. The marshals didn't stop her. The judge didn't react. Diddy's breathing was ragged now. "Off the record," he begged. "Just for a minute, please." "Off the record." I looked at the judge. He gave the nod. I removed my hands from the keys, but the mic light on the table, it stayed on. Now, was it normal? Usually when we pause recording, the light cuts out, indicates we're no longer capturing, but it kept glowing, faint red, like it was still listening. Watched Diddy lean in, voice lower. They switched it after the March raid. The original footage from Miami. It had everything. Dates, the hallway, the red room. They cut it, replaced it with something cleaner. I don't even think my team knows. He paused, looked around the room. There's a room they keep taking me to. I wake up there. I don't remember how I get in. No light, no questions, just static. He looked straight at the red light. "I know you're still listening," he said. The judge stood abruptly. "Session adjourned." I hit the stop button, the mic shirka. The light blinked once, then turned off on its own. I packed up fast, didn't make eye contact, didn't speak. I left the room with my notes and my copy of the audio file. But I didn't go home. I went straight to the review bay, private terminal, reserved for staff to double-check sealed audio before archiving. I opened the raw session file, scanned the final 3 minutes, hit play. It started fine. Off the record. Silence. Then his voice low, fearful. I switched it. I leaned forward. But the last minute, gone. Replaced by static. Soft, continuous, rolling static. I checked the waveform. The shape of the file was all wrong. It had been overwritten, not cut, covered. No voice, no background sound, just blank static, artificially inserted. That shouldn't be possible. The sealed sessions are stored in triplicate. 3 isolated systems, synced but separate. You'd need admin access on all 3 levels to manipulate them. And the backup drive? Corrupted. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Back in the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzed too loud. The carpet felt too thin beneath my feet. I passed one of the remaining lawyers outside the chamber. He didn't speak, just stood by the wall, eyes closed, as if praying to someone who wasn't listening. Later that night, I received a message in my internal inbox. No subject, no sender, just a single sentence. You typed what he said, but what he meant is gone. I'd deleted it, but I remembered, because I saw his face when he talked about his son, about the tapes, about the room. They want to call him a monster. Maybe he is, but monsters still bleed. Monsters still break. And if this trial was supposed to be about truth, then someone decided long ago that truth was too dangerous to document. Chapter 7. The verdict wasn't the plan. You don't get to my position without learning how to compartmentalize. You eat bland food, you sleep in unfamiliar beds, you speak in words that mean nothing until you're off the record. I've been in Homeland Security long enough to know that trials, especially trials with cameras, celebrities, and hashtags, aren't about justice. They're about choreography. And this one was Broadway. I was embedded in the trial monitoring unit as an internal security liaison. Officially, I was there to track potential domestic threats, flag courtroom disruptions, and report any abnormal surveillance activity. But really, I was there to make sure nothing leaked. Not the kind of nothing that ruins a headline, but the kind that ruptures the spine of an entire cultural memory. They briefed us weekly. Compartmented tiers, color-coded memos, language stripped of names. Subject 37,452 ACF42 was the only identifier ever used. Not Diddy, not Combs, just numbers. The day before the verdict, I received a memo. Paper, no digital trace, hand-delivered in an envelope that dissolved when burned. Standard. For red-tier communications. Outcome irrelevant. Myth structure intact. Collapse is cosmetic. Resume phase 2 post-verdict. I read it twice, then a third time. That line, collapse is cosmetic, echoed in my head like a migraine. It meant the trial didn't matter. The jury didn't matter. The testimony, the tears, the sealed tapes, none of it. Because the machine had already decided. I wasn't surprised. I was angry. It was theater, carefully produced, painstakingly curated to control fallout, not truth. The people needed a monster, so we gave them one. But they couldn't know how many hands had built the cage around him. Not the producers, the parties, the donors, the consultants who never used their real names. Diddy wasn't the architect. He was the stage. Around 2 a.m. I was called to the monitoring suite, an upper floor tech hub layered with redundant servers and scrub rooms where analysts watched every frame of live footage like their lives depended on it. The air smelled like static and recycled coffee. There, on one of the split screens, something new appeared. Not courtroom footage, not security. It was a private drop, an encrypted upload sent through 5 nodes across 3 continents. Leaked footage, but not the kind we were already prepared for. This showed another property, not the ones raided in March, a remote site, possibly in the Virgin Islands. Infrared drone angles, time-stamped crates being moved underground. No insignia, just black clothing, no faces. Inside one of the crates, an envelope. Inside the envelope, lists. Named. Many names. And not just partygoers or service providers. These were people from other sectors. Government, academia, medicine. Names connected to institutions I was told never to touch. Names I'd seen on clearance rosters, with levels higher than mine. A notation next to one of the names read, Foundation Tier, Host Level, Approval. And there it was. Confirmation of what some of us feared. This wasn't just about 37,452.54. He was a node, a visible one. But the structure went deeper, older, broader. The trial was a valve to release pressure, not to fix the pipe. My palms started sweating. I pinged HQ for extraction protocol. I had seen enough. Too much. The reply came 3 minutes later, short, cold. Say, witness, record. I stared at the screen, at the red blinking dot of the recording drone. They weren't pulling me out. They were keeping me in. I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was part of the redundancy, a living backup, ready to testify if the wrong leak spread too far, if the machine needed to shift narratives again. I'd be used, not protected. That night, I reviewed everything we had. I lined the memo up against the footage, against the transcripts. The patterns emerged. Every confession was curated. Every name kept outside of 37,452-54's orbit was intentional. Every thread that should have led to someone else had been cut, snipped, buried in redaction. It was never about convicting him. It was about insulating the rest. A scapegoat system. When the world wants catharsis, you give them a spectacle. A man once draped in fur and diamonds, now trembling in court, haunted by the ghost of his own empire. You let them believe he held the reins alone. Meanwhile, you shred the old lists, rewrite the timelines, burn the unapproved evidence, re-educate the history while it's still pliable. I thought about releasing the video. I had a drive, a private satellite uplink. I could have done it. But then I remembered the phrase from the memo. The collapse is cosmetic. They weren't just talking about Diddy. They were talking about all of it. They wanted the public to see the fall, because visible falls can be managed, cleaned, explained away with court language and media cycles. The invisible falls, the systemic ones, those had to be avoided at all costs. So they built this trial, not for guilt or innocence, much for narrative containment. And the verdict tomorrow? It wouldn't change anything, because it wasn't meant to. Chapter 8. They made sure he broke first. The courtroom was full, but no one made a sound. He could hear the hum of the air vents, the soft tap of someone's pen 2 rows behind the defense table, the faint rustle of starch on the guards' sleeves as they adjusted their stances. But no voices. No shifting, just the shared tension of people pretending this moment still mattered. He sat at the table, eyes unfocused, spine slightly curled like the center of his body had already given out and the rest was just waiting for instructions. He didn't blink, didn't breathe in any way you could track, didn't move when the judge cleared her throat and began reading the verdict. The camera lights weren't even on. This wasn't for the public. It was a closed verdict, the kind issued when the implications are too layered, too radioactive for a live stream. No gallery buzz, no applause. Just paper, ink, legal breath. On the charge of interstate trafficking, the words came slow. It was hard to tell if he even heard them. There was no reaction, no twitch, no sob, no defiance, not even a nod. The man known to the world as Diddy, mogul, icon, myth, was gone. What remained was a body in a suit 2 sizes too big, staring at something no one else could see. Behind his stillness, behind the whispered phrases in hidden rooms, was a trail of things no one in that room would ever see. But the ones who'd been there, the ones who'd watched it happen, they remembered. Flash, the midnight deprivation drills, where the lights would blink on for exactly 7 minutes at 2:53 a.m. every night, time to interrupt REM cycles until the walls began to hum in his ears and he forgot what silence used to sound like. Flash, the padded chair in the bleach-scrubbed room C. No voices, no questions, just the metronome pulse of a light that didn't exist on any switchboard, blinking at rhythms designed to erode temporal memory. The kind of erosion that makes a man forget the days of the week, but remember the guilt with photographic clarity. Flash, the tray messages, returned food stamped with handwritten threats, carved in his own scrawl, though he swore he never wrote them. How many verdicts before death? They told me my son was in the other room. The recordings are lies. They swapped them. Flash, the guards assigned to whisper betrayals through the vent. A rotating script. Your lawyer's gone. Your son refused to testify. You're being erased already. A few dozen words repeated every third night, right as he began to drift to sleep. Flash, the visitations. Faces he recognized, former friends, collaborators, family. But they never spoke, just stood behind the glass, unmoving, eyes blacked out in the footage. The audio feed never worked. They weren't real. Maybe they never were. Flesh. The Mem 51 formula slipped into his meals. Not poison, not sedative, just the numbing of flavor, color, memory, the slow erasure of the senses. A man who cannot taste, cannot feel hunger, cannot predict the texture of what he eats. He forgets how to crave. He forgets how to speak. In the room, the judge finished reading. No gasp, no protest, no clatter of chains. Just a faint squeak of the bench as he leaned forward, barely perceptible, as though his body had remembered it was alive just long enough to shift weight. One of the guards whispered something to the other. The second nodded. They stood him up. His legs didn't quite cooperate, so they steadied him, then rolled out the wheelchair they'd kept tucked just behind the curtain. As they moved toward the side door, past the polished benches and dead microphones, a voice from the back of the chamber, a guard, maybe a marshal, no one ever confirmed, murmured under his breath. Etta thought the trial was the punishment, but that ended last week. No one replied. They wheeled him out. Afterward, the room emptied without ceremony, files collected, tapes sealed. Even the stenographer left with more questions than keys. And somewhere, far away, in a gated Miami property untouched by raid or search warrant, a cleaning crew unlocked a forgotten wing. The floors still glistened with marble. The air smelled faintly of sea salt and thyme. They opened a door sealed with 3 rusted bolts. Inside, a room padded wall to wall with foam soundproofing. No furniture, no windows, just silence. A single gold record sat crooked on the floor, half covered in dust, its label faded beyond recognition. And on the back wall, carved deep into the padding as though done over many years, a message remained, barely visible but unmistakable. They didn't want him judged, they wanted him erased. Outside, the sun shone. The breeze carried the illusion of peace. But inside that room, the myth had already died. They just made sure he broke first.